The auction of shame, the smell of smoke and sweat filled the air. 1,000 voices mixed together, loud, cruel, and eager. The black market was alive tonight. Strange lights hung from the high, broken ceiling. Below them, cages were stacked in rows, each one holding a living being. Some were old, some were young. All were scared. In this place, no one was a person. They were goods to be sold. Daniel moved slowly through the crowd. T's face was hidden under a hood, his steps careful. He was here for a reason, but not the same reason as the others. Around him, alien traders shouted prices and laughed at cruel jokes. At the far end of the room, the biggest cage was placed on a raised platform. Inside it, curled up in the corner, was a young alien woman. Her silver skin seemed to glow faintly even under the dirty lights. Her eyes were large, bright, but full of fear. She wore only torn fabric, barely enough to cover her. The auctioneer, a tall, thin alien with sharp teeth, banged his staff on the floor. Next item, he shouted. Rare species. Young, healthy, perfect condition. The crowd leaned forward. Some laughed, some whistled, some shouted ugly words. The auctioneer smiled wide. Pleasure animal, trained to obey. Sold by weight. Loud laughter filled the air. Daniel's hands tightened inside his sleeves. His jaw tensed. Pleasure animal. They were calling her that as if she was not alive, as if she was not someone. The auctioneer pulled her up by the chain around her neck. She stumbled but did not resist. Her thin body shook as he turned her around for the crowd to see. 80 kilos of pure beauty. The auctioneer announced. Let's start the bidding. Hands shot up. The numbers climbed fast. Each bid like a knife in Daniel's ears. The girl's eyes darted from one bidder to another, searching for mercy, but finding none. Daniel stepped closer. She's worth nothing outside the bedroom. One alien laughed. Or the kitchen, another shouted. Or the slaughterhouse. A third voice called, sending the crowd into another wave of laughter. Daniel's heart burned. This is wrong. The girl's gaze dropped to the ground, her shoulders curling inwards. She looked ready to disappear into herself. Then, for a moment, her eyes flicked up and met Daniel's. It was only for a heartbeat. But he saw it something deep inside her, small but alive. Hope. The bidding continued. 100 credits. 150. 200. Daniel's voice cut through the noise. 500. The room went silent for a second. Heads turned. Even the auctioneer's smile froze. What did you say, human? 500 credits, Daniel repeated, his tone calm but sharp. The auctioneer's eyes narrowed. You must really like her, human? Or maybe you're a fool. The crowd burst into laughter again, but Daniel didn't care. His eyes stayed on the girl. She blinked at him, confused. Any other bids? The auctioneer called. No one spoke. Sold? He slammed his staff on the floor. To the human with 2. Much money. The chain was unhooked from the cage. She was led down the steps toward Daniel. Her steps were small, almost silent. She did not look at him, only at the ground. The auctioneer handed Daniel the chain, grinning. She's yours. Do what you want. They don't last long, so enjoy while you can. Daniel didn't answer. He took off his heavy coat and placed it around her shoulders. The crowd went quiet again, their amusement fading into confusion. She looked up at him for the first time, eyes wide. No one had covered her before. No one had cared if she was cold. Daniel leaned closer and said in a low voice, You're coming? With me? And you are not what they say you are. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then, very slowly, she nodded. As they walked out, the market's noise faded behind them. Whispers followed them, questions, jokes, insults. But Daniel didn't. Slow down, the girl clutched the coat tighter around herself. She still didn't know what this human wanted from her. But for the first time in years, the chain around her neck didn't feel like the end of her life. It felt like the beginning. The humans purchased the narrow streets outside the black market were cold and wet. Rainwater dripped from metal roofs, and the smell of smoke still clung to Lyra's skin. She walked beside the human, his coat heavy around her small frame. The chain was still in his hand, but he didn't pull it. He simply held it loose, like he was afraid to hurt her. Her eyes darted around, expecting someone to jump out and drag her back. The market had a way of reclaiming its property. They passed a group of alien traders standing in the shadows. One of them smirked and called, "Out, enjoy your new toy, human." The others laughed. Lyra flinched. She had heard words like that many times before. Usually, they were followed by hands grabbing her, pulling her somewhere she didn't want to go. But Daniel didn't react with laughter or anger. He just kept walking, his pace steady, his eyes forward. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why? Why did you buy me?" Daniel glanced at her. "Because no one else in there saw you as a person." She frowned, unsure what that meant. No one had called her a person in years. To them, she was only a thing. They reached a small transport vehicle parked in the shadows. Daniel opened the door for her. She hesitated. No one had ever let her enter first before she slid inside carefully, still clutching the coat. The inside smelled of old leather and something faintly sweet tea leaves. She sat in silence while Daniel started the engine. The rain began to fall harder as they left the city behind. The bright, noisy streets gave way to quiet roads lit only by scattered street lamps. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Lyra kept her eyes on the floor, afraid to meet his gaze. She had been bought before. Every time, it meant pain. It meant losing another piece of herself. She had learned to expect it. And yet, this human was different. He hadn't pulled her roughly. He hadn't touched her without permission. He had even covered her with his coat. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "My home," Daniel said simply. Her stomach tightened. She imagined chains, small rooms, maybe worse. She told herself not to believe in kindness, it was safer that way. After an hour, they reached a quiet area on the outskirts of the city. The air here smelled cleaner. Small houses sat far apart from each other, surrounded by patches of land. Daniel stopped the vehicle outside a modest home with a dim porch light. He stepped out and opened her door. "Come on." She followed him up the steps, her bare feet cold against the wooden boards. Inside, the house was warm. The faint scent of fresh bread lingered in the air. A fire crackled in a small stove. Daniel closed the door behind them and unlocked the chain from her neck. The sudden absence of weight surprised her. She touched her skin where the metal had been. It felt lighter, freer. He tossed the chain into a corner and said, "You won't need that anymore." She looked at him, startled. "You're not keeping it?" He shook his head. "You're not a prisoner here." The words were strange. In her ears, not a prisoner. She didn't know what to do with that. Daniel disappeared into another room and came back with a folded blanket. "Here, you're probably cold." She hesitated before taking it. It was soft against her skin, warmer than any cloth she had been given in years. "Sit," he said, motioning toward a small table near the fire. She obeyed automatically, still expecting a trick. But instead of demands, he placed a steaming bowl in front of her. It smelled rich and savory. She stared at it. "This? For me?" "Of course." She took a slow sip. The taste flooded her mouth with warmth. She didn't realize tears were forming until one rolled down her cheek. Daniel noticed but didn't say anything. He simply let her eat. When she was done, she pushed the bowl back carefully, almost as if she was afraid of breaking it. "Thank you," she whispered. "You can stay here," he said. "You're safe." She wanted to believe him, but the memory of the black market was still too fresh. Safety felt like something that could be stolen at any moment. That night, she lay in a small but clean room he had given her. The blanket was wrapped tightly around her. The coat was still near her face, holding the faint scent of rain and leather. She stared at the ceiling, wondering who this human really was. No one had ever bought her without wanting something in return. She whispered into the dark, as if testing the words on her tongue. "My name is Lyra." In the next room, Daniel sat by the fire, listening. He smiled faintly. It was the first time she had told anyone her name in years, and he promised himself it would not be the last. The first act of kindness morning light slipped through the thin curtains, painting soft lines across the small room. Lyra opened her eyes slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. The bed beneath her was soft, the blanket warm. For years, she had slept on cold floors, in cages, or on thin mats. The quiet in the room felt almost unreal. No shouting traders, no clinking chains, no jeering voices. Her fingers touched the side of her neck where the metal collar used to be. It was still strange to feel nothing there in the next room. She heard faint sounds, footsteps, a chair moving, something sizzling. Her first thought was that she was late for some duty. Panic made her sit up quickly, but then she remembered Daniel's words from last night. "You're not a prisoner here." Still, her body moved out of habit. She folded the blanket neatly before stepping into the hallway. The smell of warm food drifted through the air. Daniel was in the small kitchen, placing bread on a plate. He glanced at her with a small smile. "Morning? Hungry?" She hesitated. "Yes, but I can wait until you eat." He shook his head. "Sit." She sat at the small table again, her hands in her lap. He placed bread, fruit, and a cup of tea in front of her. "This is for me?" she asked, still uncertain. "Of course, eat." Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the bread. The first bite filled her mouth with warmth and softness. She had eaten scraps for so long that real food felt strange, almost overwhelming. Halfway through the meal, her hand brushed the edge of the cup. It tipped over, spilling tea across the table. Her eyes widened in panic. She shot up from the chair and dropped to her knees, head bowed low. "I'm sorry. Please don't." Daniel was beside her in an instant. Hey, stop." She froze, waiting for the blow or the shout. Instead, he crouched down and picked up the cup. "It's just tea, Lyra," he said gently. "It's nothing to be afraid of." She slowly raised her head, confused. "You're not angry." He gave her a small smile. "Do you think I'd punish you for spilling tea?" Her voice shook. Others did. Daniel's hands tightened for a moment before he forced himself to relax. "Well, I'm not like them." They cleaned the table together. Lyra moved carefully, as if expecting him to change his mind at any moment. But he didn't. When they finished, he said, "Come outside for a moment." She followed him out to a small garden behind the house. The air was fresh, and morning dew sparkled on the plants. "This is where I grow food," Daniel explained. "I used to trade some of it in the market. Now it's mostly for me." She bent down to touch a leaf. "It's alive." Daniel chuckled softly. "Yes, it is." She looked at him with a faint, almost shy expression. "You take care of living things?" "Yes, always have." They spent the next hour outside. He showed her how to water the plants, how to check for bad leaves, and how to gently tie the taller ones so they wouldn't break. For Lyra, it was the first time in years that her hands had touched something without fear of breaking it or being punished for it. When they returned inside, Daniel poured her another cup of tea without saying a word about the earlier accident. She stared at it for a moment before finally whispering, "Thank you." He nodded. "You're welcome." Later that day, Daniel left to get supplies. Lyra stayed behind, sitting by the window. She watched birds hop along the fence, free to come and go as they pleased. A thought came to her, a dangerous one. Maybe I am free too, but her mind quickly pushed it away. Freedom was fragile. She had learned not to trust it. When Daniel returned, he carried a small bag. He placed it on the table and pulled out something folded soft, pale fabric. "For you," he said. She took it carefully. It was a dress, simple but clean, far better than the torn cloth she had been wearing. Her voice was barely a breath. "No one has ever given me clothes before." Daniel smiled faintly. "Well, now someone has." She held the dress against her chest, feeling its weight, its warmth. Something stirred deep inside her, a memory of being cared for. Long before the black market, long before the cages. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized something strange. It had been an entire day, and no one had hurt her. The past she hides the days passed quietly in Daniel's small home. For Lyra, every morning still felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. She had clothes now, a warm bed, and food that wasn't scraps. Daniel never raised his voice, never pulled her by the arm, never called her by those ugly names from the market. But even with these changes, a wall still stood between them. Whenever Daniel tried to ask about her past, her eyes would go distant. She would answer with short words or change the subject. One evening, the air outside was cool, and the soft glow of the stove lit the small kitchen. Daniel was fixing a simple dinner when he heard a faint sound from the hallway, a muffled sob. He set down the knife and followed the sound. The door to Lyra's room was half closed. He knocked gently. "Lyra?" No answer. Only silence. He pushed the door open a little. More. She was sitting on the bed, her knees drawn to her chest, her face buried in her arms. Her silver hair fell like a curtain around her dot. Daniel stepped inside quietly. "What's wrong?" She shook her head without looking up. "Nothing." "It doesn't look like nothing." Her voice came out low, almost broken. "You don't want to know." "Yes," Daniel said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I do." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red, shining in the dim light. "They took me from my village," she began, her voice trembling. It was night. The sky was on fire. Ships came down, and people in armor marched through the streets. They killed anyone who resisted. Daniel's fists tightened in his lap, but he stayed silent. "They were looking for my kind," she continued. "My species. People say we are beautiful, rare. That makes us valuable in the wrong way. They took me and others. Young women mostly. We were put in cages before the suns rose." "Guys." She paused, swallowing hard. "I was sold to a trader first. He made me serve drinks at his den. But it was never just drinks. If I refused, there were punishments." Daniel's jaw tightened. He could see she was shaking, but she kept speaking, as if the words had been locked inside for too long. "When I became too thin, he sold me to another. That one treated me like a pet. I had to walk beside him at markets so he could show me off. Sometimes he weighed me in front of others, laughing if I was lighter, calling me worthless." Her hands gripped the blanket. "Every time I was sold, it felt like a piece of me disappeared. I stopped speaking my name. I stopped looking people in the eyes. It was easier to be nothing than to hope for anything." The room was silent, except for the faint crackle of the stove in the next room. Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady. "How long?" "Years," she whispered. "I don't know how many. Stop counting." She glanced at him, as if expecting him to pity her or turn away. But he didn't. His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "You're here now," he said, "and no one is taking you again." Her lip trembled. "You can't promise that. The ones who sold me, they'll want me back. They always come." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Then they'll have to get through me first." For a moment, she just stared at him. Then she looked away, as if afraid to believe him. The next day, she was quieter than usual. She moved through the house like a shadow, helping where she could, but avoiding long talks. Daniel noticed. He didn't push her. He knew trust was built slowly, like a small fire in the cold it needed patience to grow. That night, he stood at the window, watching the dark hills in the distance. The thought kept circling in her mind. If they come for me, will he really fight for me? Or will he give me back to save himself? Her heart wanted to believe the first answer. But her past whispered the second. The hunters calmed the wind outside, was sharp and cold, rattling the loose boards on Daniel's porch. The quiet of the countryside usually comforted Lyra, but that night it felt too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Daniel was working in the garden shed, fixing an old lantern. Lyra was in the kitchen, sorting vegetables, when she felt it. A strange heaviness in the air. Her hands froze over the basket. The feeling was familiar. The same crawling dread she used to get before her old masters appeared. A shadow passed across the kitchen window. She looked up quickly. No one was there. "Daniel," she called, her voice tight. "Yeah." His voice came from outside. "I thought I saw something." He appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands. "What did you see?" She shook her head. "Maybe nothing." But her eyes kept flicking toward the window. That night, she found it hard to sleep. Every creak in the house made her flinch. At one point, she sat up in bed, certain she had heard footsteps outside her room. The next morning, Daniel went into town to trade for supplies. Lyra stayed behind, but she kept the door locked. She tried to calm herself. Maybe it really was nothing. But by afternoon, she knew she was wrong. A faint hum filled the air, the sound of engines. She stepped outside and saw them, two black hovercrafts gliding down the dirt road, their tinted windows hiding the passengers. Her stomach dropped. "They found me." Before she could run, the vehicle stopped right in front of the house. 3 figures stepped out, to large, heavily built aliens in dark armor, and between them, a thin man she recognized instantly. The auctioneer. His smile was just as she remembered, cold and sharp. "Property spotted," he said to his guards. "Let's take her." Lyra backed up toward the door. "I'm not yours." The auctioneer laughed. "You always were. That human? He's nothing. He can't keep you." The guards stepped forward. She turned to run inside, but one of them grabbed her arm. She kicked and twisted, but his grip was iron. "Let go of me," she cried, her voice breaking. Just then, the roar of an engine tore through the air. Daniel's vehicle skidded to a stop on the dirt road. He jumped out before it fully halted, his eyes locking on Lyra. "Let her go," he shouted. The auctioneer smirked. "The fool who overpaid. You didn't really think you could keep her, did you?" "She's not yours to keep or take," Daniel said, moving closer. The guard stepped between them. "Walk away, human," one growled. "This is none of your business." "She is my business," Daniel said, his voice low but dangerous. One guard reached for a weapon, but Daniel was faster. He swung a heavy wrench from his bag, striking the guard's arm and making him drop the blaster. Lyra wrenched herself free and ran toward Daniel. The second guard lunged for her, but Daniel shoved him back hard. The auctioneer's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake, human. This ends badly for you." Daniel didn't flinch. "No, it ends badly for you if..." You don't leave. For a tense moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the wind and the distant hum of the hovercraft engines. Finally, the auctioneer raised a hand to his men. Enough. We'll be back for what's ours. They climbed into the vehicles and sped off, dust rising in their wake. Lyra stood frozen, her breath shaking. Daniel stepped to her side. Are you hurt? She shook her head, but her eyes were wide with fear. They'll come back. They'll always come back. Daniel looked toward the horizon where the vehicles had vanished. His jaw tightened. Then we'll be ready. That night, he locked every door and window. He moved supplies into one room and gave her a small communicator. If I'm not here, and you see them, you call me immediately. Lyra clutched the device. Why are you doing this? You could let them take me and be safe. Daniel met her gaze. Because you're not theirs. And I'm not letting you go back to that. For the first time since she had met him, she believed he meant it. But deep inside, she knew the real fight hadn't even started yet. The fight for freedom 3 nights passed without a sign of the auctioneer or his men. But Daniel knew it was too quiet. Lyra tried to stay calm, but every sound outside made her tense. She slept with the blanket pulled tight, eyes open for long stretches of the night. On the 4th evening, Daniel went into town to get more fuel. When he returned, the front door was ajar. His heart dropped. Lyra, he called, stepping inside. Silence. A single scrap of paper lay on the table. In crude handwriting, it read, Property reclaimed. Daniel's chest burned with anger. He gripped the note so tightly it tore in his hand. He knew exactly where they had taken her. He loaded his old pistol, strapped on a tool belt filled with anything that could be used as a weapon: wrenches, a crowbar. A small stun battalion drove toward the darker part of the city. The black market's main district was alive with noise. But Daniel ignored it. He knew about the warehouse where the worst trades happened. The place was an old cargo station, its windows broken, its walls covered in rust. He parked a block away and moved on foot, keeping to the shadows. Inside the warehouse, the auctioneer stood on a small platform, speaking to a small group of buyers. Lyra was there, her hands chained, her head lowered, her silver hair catching the faint light. The auctioneer was smiling as he spoke. She's worth twice what this human fool paid. Tonight, she will go to someone who knows her value. Lyra's stomach turned at his words. She had thought Daniel wouldn't come. She had told herself not to hope. Then the lights flickered and went out completely. A loud crash echoed from the side door. A figure burst through the darkness. Daniel. The crowd scattered in surprise. One guard rushed him, but Daniel slammed the crowbar into his side, sending him to the ground. Lyra, he shouted. Her head snapped up. Daniel. The second guard lunged, but Daniel caught his arm, twisted, and shoved him into a pile of crates. A blaster shot rang out, missing Daniel by inches and burning a hole in the wall. The auctioneer snarled, pulling a small weapon from his belt. You should have stayed home, human. Daniel didn't answer. He charged forward, knocking the weapon from the auctioneer's hand with the crowbar. The two struggled, shoving each other across the platform. Lyra twisted her wrists against the chains. One of the guards, dazed from the fight, had dropped a key. She lunged for it, her fingers brushing the cold metal. The auctioneer grabbed Daniel by the collar and slammed him against the wall. She belongs to me. Daniel pushed back, his voice like steel. She belongs to herself. Lyra's chains clattered to the ground. She ran to Daniel's side, grabbing the stun baton from his belt. When the auctioneer moved to attack again, she struck. Electric light crackled, and the man fell back with a shout. Move! Daniel yelled. They ran for the side door, but 2 more guards appeared. Daniel swung the crowbar, blocking one, while Lyra kicked over a barrel, sending the other tumbling. They burst into the street, the cold air hitting their faces. Behind them, shouts rose as the auctioneer's men scrambled to give chase. Daniel led Lyra down a narrow alley, weaving through shadows until the sounds of pursuit began to fade. They reached his vehicle, breathless. As they drove away, Lyra clutched the stun baton in her lap, her hands still shaking. "You came?" she whispered. Daniel glanced at her. "Of course I did." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked out the window, the lights of the city fading behind them. "No one's ever come back for me before." Daniel's voice was quiet but certain. "Get used to it." Choo. Worth road home was quiet, except for the low hum of the engine. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel, the other ready on the pistol resting in his lap. He didn't trust that the auctioneer would give up so easily. Beside him, Lyra sat with Daniel's coat wrapped tightly around her, the stun baton still clutched in her hands. Her breathing was slowing, but the tremble in her fingers hadn't gone away. When they reached the small house, Daniel parked behind the shed, out of sight from the road. He helped Lyra inside, locking the doors and checking every window. Only after making sure they were safe did he sit across from her at the table. "You're hurt," he said, nodding toward a bruise on her arm. "It's nothing," she murmured. "It's not nothing." He got up, found the small first aid kit, and began cleaning the mark. His touch was careful. It's not like the rough hands she'd known before. She watched him in silence for a moment, then said quietly, "You could have died tonight." Daniel gave a small smile. "So could you." She shook her head. "I'm not." "Worth that risk?" His eyes lifted to meet hers. "That's where you're wrong, Lyra. You're worth it. Always were." The words settled into her like warmth on a winter night. No one had ever said anything like that to her, not, and meant it. They ate in silence, the crackle of the stove filling the room. When the meal was done, Daniel stood and walked the small cabinet in the corner. He took something out and placed it on the table, a thin metal tag on a chain. "This was mine," he said. "When I was in the service. It's not much, but it's the only thing I've carried for years." She frowned slightly. "Why are you giving it to me?" "'Cause I want you to have something that's yours. Not stolen, not traded, not bought. Yours." Her fingers closed around the tag. It was warm from his hand. "This is really mine." Yes. For a long time, she just stared at it. Then she slipped the chain over her neck, letting the tag rest against her chest. That night, she stood by the window, looking out at the quiet hills. The fear hadn't fully left Hirsch. She knew there were still people in the galaxy who would see her as a thing to own. But now, for the first time, she also knew there was someone who would stand between her and them. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. She froze, glancing at Daniel. He approached quietly, pistol ready, and opened the door a crack. An older neighbor stood outside with a sack of food. "Heard there was trouble in town. Thought you could use some supplies." Daniel thanked him and shut the door, bolting it again. When he turned, Lyra was watching him. "You're not afraid?" she asked. "Oh, I'm afraid," he said. "But fear doesn't mean you stop doing the right thing." Her lips curved into the smallest smile. "Then, maybe I can learn that too." The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen as Lyra poured tea for both of them. She moved differently now, not like someone waiting for permission, but like someone who belonged. Daniel sat at the table, watching her. "What will you do if they come again?" Her hand paused for only a moment before she answered, "Stand beside you." He smiled faintly. "That's the spirit." Later, as they worked in the garden together, Lyra caught herself humming a tune from her childhood she thought she had forgotten. Daniel glanced at her, and she flushed, embarrassed. "Don't stop," he said. "It's good to hear." By evening, the garden was watered, the tools put away, and the sky above them burned orange with sunset. They sat on the porch, the air cool and quiet. "You know," Daniel said, "when I first saw you in that cage, I thought you looked untouchable, like you were already somewhere far away." Her eyes softened. I was. I had to be. It was the only way to survive. And now? She looked at him for a long moment. Now, I'm here. The last light faded from the sky. But neither of them moved to go inside. For the first time, Lyra felt no chain on her neck. No eyes watching her like she was a prize to be taken. She touched the metal tag around her neck and said quietly, "You didn't just save me, Daniel. You gave me back to myself." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the distance, the city lights glimmered like stars. But here, on this small porch in the quiet hills, the world felt wide open. And for Lyra, it was the first time in years that freedom didn't feel like a dream.